Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I'm a psychotherapist, teacher, consultant, and most importantly, a wounded healer, living and working in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm your host, Anne Remy. I'm a counseling psychotherapist, yoga teacher, and trauma specialist living in Brighton, UK. On this show, we interview folks in a variety of healing professions, and we discuss the intersectional journey of healing self while caring for others.
But we're not just focused on individual healing, but also healing on the collective level, from white supremacy, late-stage capitalism, and the patriarchy. Thanks for joining us. Hello, Anne.
Hey, Sarah.
You got the vids.
Yeah, the Rona came for me.
Boo.
Yeah, it's all right.
Knocking on wood, because I don't know how I missed this whole outbreak and I got my vaccine, so I am now invincible.
This one it's my own fault because I just wanted to see a drag queen sing some show tunes.
Well,
and do you know what? It was worth it. So I'm taking it as a good reminder to rest and take care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I, as a result, have watched Only Murders in the Building.
Oh.
Yeah, which I tried to watch before and I didn't like it. And I was like, if everybody loves it so much, like, what am I missing? And I tried again and I was like, oh, this is actually delightful.
It is delightful. So, yeah. I wouldn't say it's great because, it's still in my queue, half watched. And I'm like,
It's perfect. I am sick on the couch TV.
Yes, exactly. It's not too stressful.
No.
You know, I love Steve Martin. Big fan.
I think I didn't Google it, but for him to get this far and to not be problematic, as with so many other, at least I don't think he is, but as with so many others of his generation and profession, I feel like maybe he is a nice guy. I
think he is. Yeah. Have you seen his documentary on Apple TV?
No.
Again, delightful. I think he is a delightful person.
Okay. That makes me happy.
Yeah. Great. Well, enough about Steve Martin, more about us. I did want to share with people a couple of things that I have coming up because I'm doing a lot. And
you are doing it.
Trust me. I mean, I know that there's things I need to calm down and not necessarily be doing all of the things, but here are some of the things I'm doing that you might be interested in. So I ran my Authentic Leaders group last year. We just ended the first round and the delightful, lovely humans were so amazing. We're going to do it again starting in November.
Yay.
So you can find out more information about that on my website, headheartbiztherapy.com/authentic-leaders-group. But yeah, that's for anybody who is a therapist, whether you're a practice owner or a supervisor or a manager, and you just really want to dig into your leadership skills a little bit deeper. Another thing, this is in person. So unfortunately, this is only for people in the Chicagoland area. Or, I mean, if you want to fly in for it, cool, you could do that too, but that seems excessive. But I'm doing an in-person right use of power basics training. This is my first official right use of power sanctioned training.
Woo-hoo.
It's going to be at Head Heart Therapy. You can go to rightUseofPower.org/event/basics-training-Chicago. And that's going to be on November 15th. Also, my consultant and I, Aggie Chajinski, we've been doing a lot of webinars on financial literacy. We've been doing that and it's been so successful and we realize people need it so much. We're starting to do it every month. And so starting on October 17th, we're going to be doing, I think it's the third Thursday of every month from 7 to 8 p.m. Central. And you can find that at tinyurl.com/GP for group practice financial literacy. So I'm really excited about all of that stuff. This is the problem with my life. I love everything that I do and it's so fun, but it's a lot.
I empathize with this problem.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're just doers, you and I. We're just doers.
3s and 7s are big doer people.
Yes, because I'm taking your word for this, for me being a 7. That's what we've decided.
Yeah. I mean, you can take an Enneagram test if you want to.
I tried to take one and then it asked me to pay $20 to get the result. And I was like,
well,
no.
What? Yeah, let me give you a test. I've got one that's free.
Okay. I'll take it. I mean, I'm quite happily trusting your assessment.
There may be something going on inside of you that I don't know about. I doubt it, but there could be.
Right now, the only thing going on inside of me is snot.
Yeah. And I was going to say, speaking of snot, but that's not what I want to say.
Oh, no.
But what did you think about my conversation with Mark?
Man, yeah, definitely not speaking of snot.
Right?
He's the opposite of snotty. He was great.
I love it.
You said something about how it was really healing for you to hear someone in his position speak the way he does about his clients or something like this. And I was having the exact same reaction to that.
Yeah.
And I really felt like, because I'm dealing with lawyers and stuff right now, and I'm like, I know my lawyer doesn't feel like that about me.
Right.
Which I don't need her to.
Right.
I don't need her to. But like, because he said he was a public defender, right?
At one point, yeah.
Yeah. And I love that someone in a job that is like so taxing and so exhausting was able to make space, because the people that he was defending are the people in the most need. And I really, really love that. Yeah. So I think it just warmed the cockles of my heart, which is so skeptical of the justice system.
Right? Exactly. That's why, like, when I heard him speak at the Integral conference, I was like, if more people were having legal/political conversations like this, we would not be in the deeply polarized zeitgeist that we're in. So it always makes me happy to know that there's somebody out there with authority in a field that doesn't always embrace vulnerability and compassion. They are spreading it in a field where that's almost antithetical. That's how we change the world.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I really felt that from him. And it made me really happy that he's a professor and that people get to learn that from him. Right. And I was thinking about this episode of Malcolm Gladwell's podcast. He did a sort of deep dive into like universities and like, are you actually getting the best education at an Ivy League?
Interesting.
Yeah, it was really good. But he said going to an Ivy League is going to present you with a lot more opportunities for high-powered blah, 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 because of the nature of the beast.
Yep.
But he said you're actually getting a better education at more local universities because you're getting people like Mark.
Yeah, Mark Fischler. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're getting people like Mark who are the teachers and who haven't just taken like a one-track thing. Yeah, so it really made me think about that and how I can only imagine his students are getting such a great perspective from him.
Yeah. Yay. Okay, good. Well, let's introduce the world to Mark Fischler. So Mark is an award-winning professor of criminal justice at Plymouth State University in New Hampshire. He's a former New Hampshire public defender and also hosts a podcast on the Integral Life website called Integral Justice Warrior. So please enjoy my conversation with Mark Fischler.
Woo.
Hello, Mark. Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer.
Hey, Sarah. Nice to see you again and honored to be on this podcast. So let's have some fun. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm super excited to chat today. And just to orient listeners to how we came to know each other, I went to my first Integral conference. It was the ICON conference. And we'll talk a little bit about Integral and what it is. And I'll get some definitions from you because I still don't have my head wrapped around all of it. But I saw you do a talk. What was the name of the talk again?
It was on integral constitutional theory.
Yeah. And you said some things that were so important and challenging that I think need to be heard. And so that's one of the reasons I invited you on here. And also I just liked your vibe and wanted to chat more.
Thank you.
That's why we're here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I liked your vibe too. So I'm really happy to converse and share some of my story and learn from you too. So,
great.
Let's dance, right?
Let's learn together. Well, do you want to start with telling listeners what it is that you're doing nowadays? And then we'll go back to the beginning.
Yeah. So right now I'm a professor of criminal justice at Plymouth State University in Plymouth, New Hampshire. I live a little outside of Plymouth in a little town called Thornton. And I've been at Plymouth State for 20 years.
Wow.
I'll be starting my 21st year in the fall. And so I teach ethics. I teach criminal law, criminal procedure. I've taught constitutional law, so kind of the law-related courses. And the reason why that is because I went to law school. I'm a former lawyer.
A recovering lawyer, so to speak.
Well, no, I'll be defensive about that I didn't leave the law because I was burnt out or anything like that. I was actually at a really good point, but there's a story there, so we'll get to it. But I still love the law, and who knows what will happen where the journey of life takes me. So I'll always leave that door open. But yes, I did leave being a lawyer, and eventually I got an opportunity to be a teacher. So that's what I do.
Yeah. What led you to the law?
That's a really interesting question. When I was in college, I was really into politics. I really kind of thought that I would be a governor, senator, along those lines. And so I kind of had this idea in my head. I just kind of created it. I don't even know if I consulted with anyone. I was a political science major, and then I would go on from that and get like a degree, a higher degree in political science. Then I would work on Capitol Hill, and then I would run for office at some point. But when I was in college, I had a professor named John Kaiser, who recently passed away, very conservative philosopher, and he taught the kind of philosophy classes in political science. And he just turned me on to Socrates and questions of justice, and turned me on more than I even knew, because I remember I saw Professor Kaiser going into my senior year, and he came up to me and he had thought I graduated, and he said, "Well, why aren't you in law school right now?"
Wow.
And at that point, I had never even contemplated going to law school. And he injected a little seed in there that I didn't fully take until I had a couple more people mention that independently. One was another professor that I had who said, law school is really much more up your alley than, going to PhD school, if you ask me. That was Professor Craig, Robert Craig. And then right out of college, right away, I taught at a prep school for the summer, Cardigan Mountain Prep School. And another person there independently said, you really ought to think about law school. And so right then I was like, okay, that's it. These three independent people that I have respect for all see something in me that I don't fully understand, because I didn't even take constitutional law at that point in college. And so I decided I was going to go to law school. And I applied over that next year, lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, hung out. And I during that time, I had the best job that I ever had, which was the junior high school riot team baseball coach, which was a lot of fun. But I applied, and then I got to law school, and right away I started reading the case law. And it would be like reading Roe versus Wade, and you'd like read one side, and I'd be like, okay, I'm totally with them. And then I'd read the dissent, and I'm like, wait, they make all kinds of sense too. And so I was like, oh, I would go home and my brain would I would have a headache. It was like overtaxed at that point of like trying to reconcile, because I was under the assumption that there had to be one right answer, which is where we're going to head down the road to integral, which recognizes there are partial pieces of truth. So I really loved that experience of law school. And I had this underlying philosophical foundation where I was still reading philosophy and really enjoying those things. And I remember my senior year of law school, I took a class called jurisprudence, which is about the philosophy of law. And there's kind of there's two roads, and one is called positive law and one is called natural law. Positive law is more of the observable law, the external expressions, whereas natural law is kind of the more internal or the normative or the, the values behind. And we were supposed to make a decision about what side we were on. And I remember great dissonance, because I was like, I see the partial truth of both, but I have to choose a side because that's what you do. And which is where we're going to learn the integral says you don't have to choose one side on that. And so I wrote the paper as best I could, kind of saying I honored both, but maybe edged one a little bit over the other. That was interesting. But something happened along the way when I was going into my senior year of law school, my third year. I was kind of a foundational moment of where my life changed dramatically. And I was in Yellowstone National Park with my mom and dad and my sister.
How old are you?
I am 20. I'm 25, actually. I'm pretty sure I'm 25. And so we had visited my grandparents. We're visiting my grandparents who are both very ill with different illnesses in Aurora, Colorado. And Aurora has significance because my daughter's name is Aurora.
Aww.
We did not name directly after Aurora, Colorado, but when my wife said the name, I was like, well, that has meaning for me. So anyway, they couldn't see us for more than like 2 days at a time because they were so ill and just couldn't take visitors and stuff like that. So we went up to Yellowstone, which was we had not done as a family, and it was, incredible. When I'm up there, we go to a place called the Lower Falls, which is where you can see the Yellowstone. And it's a magnificent giant waterfall, kind of like one of the biggest waterfalls in the park. And so we kind of climbed down to the overpass to kind of look at it. And when we were walking back up, there was a father carrying his son in a wheelchair down so that his son could see the view.
Wow.
And I think, we all took that in, and it was a poignant moment. But when I got back in the car, I had an agenda. I had an agenda of where I wanted to get to the border of Montana, and I wanted to get to the border of Idaho. And if you look at the juxtaposition of Yellowstone, you could get to both places. And I wanted to get that done because we're only up there for a certain amount of time. And I wanted to add that to my list of states that I had visited. And that was important to me. And in addition to that, I also wanted to do it in a timely enough manner to get back to the hotel. I think we were staying at the Old Faithful. And so that we could get to dinner in time at the main restaurant, not the cafeteria, because I believe my dad owed me a meal at a fancy restaurant. Right? So
I love this
you can
plan.
kind of get the juxtaposition of my mind and what I value and what is of importance. And so here we are, we're driving through Yellowstone National Park, and we hit a place called Hayden Valley. And it was like the Serengeti with wildlife, like running around, like buffalo crossing the road. You could see, grizzlies in the distance and see deer and elk and all of it. And you're just like, wow. But I'm not going, wow. I'm like, I need to get places. And a car in front of me is driving like really slow, and I'm not having it. And so I think I started swearing in the car. And my dad is in the front seat. I'm driving, and he looks over at me and he says, hey, Fish. My nickname was Fish. Why don't you think about the father and the son in the wheelchair who are still trying to make their way up the mountain while you yell about what? And in that moment, I didn't say anything, but I took my foot off the pedal, and internally something hit me like a ton of bricks. And I said to myself, or something said to me, there's something terribly wrong with how you're relating to life. And so I took my foot off the pedal and I got quiet. I basically stopped talking, and I would only kind of whisper, because really everything that was coming out of my mouth was a judgment, a complaint, something. And the only way I could control it was by not talking or kind of whispering. And that was kind of like the funny part. Although it's become a learned memory. My parents say they remember this moment, but they don't. They don't, because dad or mom, or they could have said that to me 1,000 times. But my karma was ready to have that be heard at that moment.
Yeah.
But what they do remember was me whispering, and we're kind of a teasing family. And so everyone's like, okay, let's talk like Mark. My dad, he was a professor at the same university as I. We crossed paths for 13 years, but he was also the director of psychological counseling for 41 years there.
Wow.
And so, there's some background of kind of like appreciation for understanding people's experiences or calling people out on their stuff.
Yeah, but kindly and gently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I tried to go silent for like about 3 days. And like I said, I realized that I was very judgmental. I lacked gratitude. I objectified humans. Like, I was like, I'd go to a market and I would like judge you. I don't even know you. Like, you seem interesting. You seem smart. You seem pretty. You seem ugly. You seem what? And I'm like, what is this? Like, this is crazy. I don't even know these people. Why am I doing this? So I just like got silent. So eventually we made our way to Aspen, Colorado. And I split off. I said, Mom and Dad, and Valerie, my sister, my younger sister, I'm like, I got to be alone for the day. And so I went to the Aspen bookstore. I remember seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger walking on the street that day in Aspen. And I decided I chose Zen Buddhism at that moment as something that would help me on my path. So I bought a book called The Three Pillars of Zen by Roshi Philip Kapleau. I remember it was the 30th anniversary edition. And I just started reading it and doing the practices in the book on the spot, brought that back to Maine, where I was going to law school, and started in the closet practicing meditation and at that point Zen Buddhism. And so from then on, I developed a kind of a spiritual awareness practice that was going into my last year of law school. And at that point, it's not like when I say all these kind of jerky things about myself. I don't. My best friends today were some of those people from then. I have more friends than that, but I had a girlfriend then, but within 3 months of when I started that path, that fell apart. And I think that was a sign of we were moving in different directions of I wasn't going to be that same person that I was. And so some things started to evolve and change, but I wouldn't say like everybody thought I was a jerk or an ass or anything like that. But I did carry those things, and that was a part of me that I started to gain awareness of. And through meditation, I started to kind of gain some space. I remember about 6 weeks into practicing, I started to notice that I didn't go into reactance immediately.
Yes.
That I went into reactance about 3 seconds later at that point. And I remember going to myself, like, what is this? Like, what is this delayed blowing up that I would react and just blow up in the moment? And finally, it just dawned on me. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the meditation.
It is. Yeah.
And so, I started to build space between my thoughts. And so, it's been a over 25, 26, 27-year journey.
See, listeners, I have told you about meditation for 5 years now. Here, another proof positive that meditation works.
Yeah. I can't say enough about that and contemplative practices. But, once you start to kind of build that muscle of awareness and kind of slowing down thoughts, you start to get the notion and start to get the inkling that you actually aren't your thoughts.
Right.
That there is so much more to your being than that. And so you don't become a slave to this kind of thought process that is so interwoven with, what I call the collective trance of society. And so it's a way of kind of stepping out of that. And so that was that part of my journey. And so then when I was in law school, I kind of always had a love of fighting for the underdog and the little guy. And, I think my dad was a professor of multicultural education. And, we didn't have any African-American professors at our school. So he was the head of the Black Student Union. And, dad would bring students into the inner city and I would kind of get to do that. And, but there was always this kind of fight for the underdog mentality in our house. And so I applied to be a New Hampshire public defender. And,
I love it.
And so that, was incredible. And I'm grateful that I was one of the 10 newbies hired and got to go to northern New Hampshire and the beautiful White Mountains up in Sugar Hill and the Littleton office and practice in the North Country. And one of the most greatest experiences of my life. and a really, really important period because, I ended up driving about 30,000 miles a year in my
Wow.
car. And so while doing that, I would be driving between courthouses because it was in the country and
Mm.
in the mountains. And so there was be 45, 50 miles between courthouses or the jails and visiting my clients. So I would listen to meditation teachers and I would do practices. And so
Mm-hmm.
during this time, I'm like deepening
Mm.
my work, my deep work, my inner work. And I absolutely feel like it made me a more effective attorney in the process. And so, it was really fascinating. I went into becoming a lawyer kind of thinking that I get like we have to check the power of the government and everybody deserves to be represented and all of that. And those are like foundational values. And kind of like I saw myself as a true patriot of checking the power of government
Mm-hmm.
and that we need those things. But what I didn't realize was going to happen was that I was going to end up falling in love with my clients. I mean, here are these people that have done some pretty awful things, some not so awful, but it's a moment in time where people have been caught doing something
Mm-hmm.
bad. And I would sit with them and I would have them tell me their kind of life story.
Mm.
And by the end of it, they would leave my office and this just spontaneously would happen. I would say, there but by the grace of God go I. And, it was like, if I lived my life, if you switched cribs,
Yep.
how can I honestly say I wouldn't have made the same decisions that they made
Precisely.
based on the environment that they were a part of, And that really impacted me.
Yeah. If I had a dime for every lawyer who said they fell in love with their clients, I'd have a dime. You probably know more than I do, but my dad, who was also a psychopath, was an attorney. And, he would say he was the worst kind of attorney, bankruptcy and divorce. And it was
Mm,
all about power for him, all about making people squirm and
yeah.
really enjoying that sadistic power play. And so it's very healing to me to hear a male attorney like talk about love in the law. That's just, yes, we need more of that. And I love that you're teaching because I'm guessing that there are students who get really inspired by the way that you are in the classroom and then can go on to practice in this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I hope you're correct. I think you're correct. I think there's some evidence out there. I just got a beautiful note from a student who's working in a law firm actually right now about the impact. So I appreciate that. I will add that there was kind of one other, I told you about that kind of spiritual moment in time. And there was another kind of foundational thing that happened in Wyoming too, where after my first year of being a lawyer, I went out, I applied to something called the Trial Lawyers College in Wyoming. And that was something run by a guy named Jerry Spence. And Jerry Spence is one of the greatest trial attorneys in our history. But he practiced in a really different way. He was a humanist and he taught from the principles of vulnerability.
Boom.
Yeah. So when I remember when I got out there, or before we got there, he had us read a book by Carl Rogers, the humanistic psychotherapist, called On Becoming a Person. It was a beautiful book where you kind of learned that through developing positive regard for your client, for your patient, that your client starts to open up and starts to unlearn and free themselves from their neuroses in the process. And so Spence saw the law in a similar way. And he saw that you had to build a relationship with your client and you had to build a relationship with the jury and that you had to humble yourself. I remember Spence saying, you think you're wiser than the 400 years of experience that sit on that jury? You think you're wiser than the maid who cleans the rooms at the hotel day after day, feeding her 3 kids? You think you're going to outsmart her? You think you're better than her? When we got to his trial college, the 48 of us that got in, and that was in the summer of 98, I went to that. And the first 4 days we spent in like therapy in small groups. It was incredible. And I had a kind of another moment of awareness where I had this inkling that I really wasn't making myself available to all people. That I was still kind of choosing. Like if I thought maybe you were really smart and I could get something from you, I would be nicer to you. Or if I was attracted to something in you in some way, that I would butter myself up a little bit more. And so I saw that, and I made a point at the Charlers College from then on for the rest of the month that I was going to get to know every single person there, from the ranch hand to the cook to the other students at the Charlers College, and not just the people that I wanted to impress or some way, take something from. And so I got some real good feedback and evidence towards the end of the experience that they saw, a sensitivity and a heart in me that was really good to hear and kind of affirmed my path. And so I took that back to my lawyering and my path.
I love that. Oh, I love that. Are you a therapist stepping into a leadership role for the first time? Or maybe you've been in a leadership position for a while, but you're bumping up against new struggles. It's a transformative journey and one that can be deeply rewarding, but also filled with unique challenges. Many therapists find themselves in leadership positions because of their exceptional therapeutic skills. Yet leading, supervising, or managing others requires a whole new set of competencies not typically covered in graduate school. Our Authentic Leaders group is here to help you become the authentic and wholehearted leader you aspire to be. We believe that the journey is best undertaken with the guidance of experienced mentors alongside fellow learners. The next cohort of Authentic Leaders will run November 2024 through June 2025, meeting once monthly on Fridays for 90 minutes. We'll also have some additional opportunities for connection and support along the way. Join me in this journey of self-discovery and leadership mastery, where you'll enhance your leadership skills and forge meaningful connections with fellow therapists committed to their own growth and the betterment of the therapy field. www.headheartbiztherapy.com/authentic-leaders-group. And there's so many questions I could ask, but I really, because of the time that we're in right now in this world, I want to get to some of that.
Yeah.
And I just want to position listeners, because this won't come out for several months. Right now, at this point in time, it sounds like we're at the precipice of Joe Biden stepping down from the ticket. Trump was just shot. The Supreme Court has said that there is basically blanket presidential immunity. So this is where we are in the moment in time. And I guess I'm just curious, this is where we can probably bring an integral too. Like, what are you making of all of this? What are your thoughts about where we are and where the fuck we're going?
Yeah. Oof,
right. Just a small question.
Just a small question. Yeah. I think we are kind of in this liminal in-between worlds moment in time. And it's really scary. I have some friends that are deeply convinced that it has to get way worse before it's gonna get better. And I in a lot of ways I hope they're wrong,
Right.
But it's a time where I think we're reaching the end of this either or. We live in this two-party system. And gosh, if that doesn't, who feels like they're just like totally the Democratic Party or the Republican Party encapsulates all your values, right? Like, I think we all feel we have a little bit of different pieces, and to kind of straitjacket a process where we don't have multiple choices.
Right.
And so, we're at this like extreme version where we have these two really old men, as our leaders, and whatever side you're on, it's kind of like the decision isn't one of like inspiration, but it's more of like whatever you perceive as the lesser of two evils. And that's really not a great choice. But I think it's probably taking us to really see this limitation of processes to have like two really kind of like ill-fitting choices. And that this is, I mean, the cultish nature of the Republican Party, right? And then the kind of like the blind ambition, turning your nose at reality of the Democratic Party, where you know it's utterly obvious, I think, to most human beings that President Biden is a good man, but it probably should have been just a 4-year president,
Yep.
and usher in a different generation where there could have been a robust debate about who ought to be the nominee. And, we're on the other side, you see this cultish aspects. I mean, some of the pictures of, people having bandages on their ear and things like that. Or kind of,
At the RNC, right?
just,
Yeah.
person that's lied 22 times while they're giving their address and just has no, so I think it's taking these kind of extreme examples for us to kind of reach a precipice of a point where we can start to see that there is alternative ways. Yeah, I'll just bring the Supreme Court because you mentioned that, and then I'm going to kind of usher in integral a little bit.
Perfect.
And we're seeing this kind of extreme with the Supreme Court where it seems to the public that many of these justices are for sale in some way. That
sure looks like it.
ProPublica's report that, and I was reading a former justice of the New Hampshire Supreme Court, Chief Justice, saying, does anyone really believe that for all the hundreds of thousands of dollars and presents and trips Clarence Thomas has been sent on by these billionaires, or at least one billionaire, that they would have been his friend if he wasn't on the Supreme Court? Like, he would have gotten all of these things.
Right.
And I thought that was a very simple, eloquent way of kind of showing these problems. So I think these problems that we see, and, I hear you with the immunity, because they did talk about absolute immunity. I am of the mind, though, that if cases come forward where people are doing some things that are really, really bad, I think they're going to say that's not exactly what we meant.
Okay, good. That's good to hear.
I mean, I believe that, but I'm not proven on that at all. But, I do think there are some voices on the conservative side, at least, that don't seem to be acting from a partisan point of view as much as others, I think.
Right. Amy Coney Barrett has surprised on some cases. Yeah.
I think she is not bought.
Yeah.
And I don't think John Roberts is bought. And so if they're going along with something, I'm going to try to understand where they're coming from and see if I can see that reasoning, because on the surface, it does seem utterly scary to think someone might have absolute immunity.
Yep.
So if we go back, so I'm a lawyer. I told you I was a lawyer. And so I had this about 3.5, 4 years into being a lawyer. I had this moment in time, again, which was kind of like everything in the world changed for me. I had this moment in time where I remember I got back from a hike in the White Mountains. It was a weekend. And I walked into my apartment in this farmhouse in Sugar Hill. And I just spontaneously said, I don't know why, am I supposed to leave everything? It's very hard to describe, but the universe completely spoke to me. And so I had this like electrical current that flushed through my body that I had no control over. That said, yes, you need to leave everything. And I shut it down right away. I'm like, what? I'm like, I am doing really well in my job. I have an offer to work in New York City with the former president of the Criminal Defense Bar for the United States to be his partner. I've got an offer from the #1 defense attorney in New Hampshire to be his associate. I can become the head of my office right now if I want. Like I'm doing well. I'm getting a good name. I'm doing good work. I'm enjoying it. It's meaningful. It's stressful. I mean, it's hard work, but I've got a nice girlfriend at the time. And so I shut it down for like a month. I didn't say it or act on it. And then I said it again and boom. And that was like in August of 2000. And I decided I'm being asked to leave everything. And I knew that meant that I needed to go on a spiritual journey. That the universe wasn't just saying like, hey, go take a nice trip to Europe and, enjoy the Greek Isles for a while. So I decided I have to leave everything. And so I eventually told my office, I told my parents, and I broke it off with my girlfriend. And, I kind of packed up my stuff and knew I was going to head west. I had a spot where I would eventually go to a retreat with the Toltecs of Don Miguel Ruiz, who wrote the Four Agreements.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I had that as my kind of destination, and I didn't know what would happen after that. So, I went to Carmicholing in Vermont and spent some time up there. It's a Buddhist retreat center, Shambhala Buddhism. And I spent some time with Bo Lozoff, who's a spiritual teacher who wrote an incredible book called We're All Doing Time, which I think a lot of your listeners would enjoy. He passed away in a motorcycle accident, but that book was forwarded by the Dalai Lama, and Bo did more work with prisoners than anybody in the world.
We'll link that in the show notes.
And that book is awesome. It's helpful for people behind bars, but in reality, we're all doing time. I spent time with Bo, and then I eventually made it out there in New Mexico. And at that retreat, I ended up meeting who would end up becoming my spiritual teacher for about a year and a half, a woman named Ginny Gentry, who I lived on her property in New Mexico, a place called Garden of the Goddess Retreat Center. I lived in a yurt and lived out of my car and lived on her land. And boy, did she bust me up.
Wow.
She took every knock at my ego wherever it was hiding and was relentless. And I have eternal gratitude to her for the work. I'm sure my wife says you need a few more years out there of getting your ass kicked. But
don't we all?
But when I was out there, I was reading this magazine called What is Enlightenment Magazine. And in it, they were talking about this philosopher who was able to connect Eastern wisdom and Western wisdom. And I'm like, oh my God, well, who's that? Because I've always had these dichotomies of like, or I've loved this philosophy and I've loved that, but they supposedly never meet. And you have to choose one over the other. And this was touting this dude named Ken Wilber.
I was going to say, let me guess.
Yeah. Who's kind of the founder of integral philosophy. And so I just started reading Ken's work from there. And just to jump ahead, about a year and a half after working with Ginny, I had another intuition to head back east, and I was supposed to teach. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that looked like. I came back east, was in some weddings, and I was like, so I supposed to be a high school teacher? So I went like substitute taught. And I was like, well, maybe the teaching means like being a lawyer that teaches his clients. And so I was about to start my own law practice, and a judge that I knew, who is a part-time judge, but a professor at Plymouth State, said, hey, I'm starting the criminal justice program. Can you put off your lawyer thing for one more year before you go back and help me start this program and just be an instructor on the year and make $25,000? And I was like, okay, I don't know. That feels right.
21 years later.
21 years later, now full professor, all of that accolades and stuff. But anyways, going back to integral, right? So the foundation of integral philosophy is that everybody has a partial piece of the truth. And that at our basis in every situation, I think people like to kind of like, see things from certain perspectives. And Ken is saying all of them really matter. And so, on one level, on the simplest level, there's 4 foundational perspectives that are always available and always happening at one time. So if like right now, if somebody said, well, it's snowing outside, which it does happen a lot here in New Hampshire, we get a lot of snow. You could, take the perspective of observing the snowflake, right? And you could measure it and understand it and see that observable reality. And that is truth, right? But at the same time, that snowflake is part of a weather pattern, right? It's a part of a system. And so, you have meteorologists that study those systems, right? And you might have environmental professors that study the snowflake for the particles and see if there's acid rain and all of those things. But that still doesn't tell us the whole story of the snowflake. That at the same time, with that snowflake, I may be moved. Like I may have internal subjective feelings about it, that I may get excited that I get to go play in the snow. And I may not, that I want the snow to go away because I'm ready for spring or whatever it is. But we have this subjective experience, and you can't separate that from the experience of the snow. And at the same time, we have a cultural experience around the snow. So you have, in our part of the country, you'll have winter carnivals and you'll have different events that, are built around the culture of when snow happens. So, which one of those is right? Well, they're all right. They're all partial. And so integral kind of allows us to see that there are these different perspectives in play. None is more dominant than the other, and all are interconnected. And you can't talk about one without talking about the other. And so, that is a foundational piece. And then at the same time, another foundational piece of integral, and I'll just leave it at these two, is that development matters. That there is something called a natural hierarchy, not a dominator hierarchy.
Right.
Dominator hierarchies are hierarchies that subjugate and hold people down in certain ways. And those are not good. And we want to do away with those. We want to break the glass ceiling. We want to ensure that all beings have equal opportunity. But we need to understand that not everything is at the same depth.
Right.
And so an acorn turns into an oak tree, right? So we can unquestionably say that the oak tree has greater depth than the acorn. And, that's a reality. We can unquestionably say that people that have PhDs have a bigger depth of knowledge than somebody in kindergarten, right?
Yep.
And so depth matters, and that there is kind of a developmental path that we can all go on in relation to that. And so we've got to recognize depth when we recognize all of those different perspectives. And, it's really important. I'm a dad of a 12-year-old child going on 18.
Yeah.
And there are concepts that I could explain to her when she was 5 or 6 that I couldn't explain when she was 1.
Yep.
And there are concepts now that we can talk about that I couldn't really talk to her about when she was 6. And so there's a developmental complexity in play. And so it's natural. And we don't judge people for that. We just understand your center of gravity, or the animal center of gravity, or the situation center of gravity, because we all start at 0 anyways.
Right.
And this developmental spiral, I think you've had someone with spiral dynamics background on your show.
Yep.
The spiral will continue on, so that in 500 years from now, whatever are the highest stages will be kindergarten level. And so we'll all look like idiots. And they'll look back at this talk and go, oh my God, this is, make sure your 4-year-old's listening to this talk. And, so it's like, keep your perspective about it, if you are at a deeper stage. And usually when you are at a deeper stage, you have less ego attachment and more availability, emotional availability as well.
Yeah. If you could pull that integral thread through what you see happening right now, in terms of legal and political, the zeitgeist. That'd be amazing.
Well, what I see is that on a legal thread with like the Supreme Court is that they really look at the majority, the conservative majority. They're coming from a value perspective that really kind of sees government as interfering with the ability of the individual to kind of unleash and make progress in their mind. So, like, the government is getting in the way of landowners using their property in ways that they want to unleash and use their property, and that the government is getting in the way on a religious basis of allowing individuals to pray in public places or to do what the individual feels they should be unleashed to do. And so there's a little bit more of what we might kind of focus on rugged individualism, a stage, and kind of traditional kind of religious values. And so in integral circles, we kind of talk about that as between amber and orange.
And in spiral dynamics, we'd say blue. So just blue and orange.
Blue to orange. And so whereas some of the higher stages kind of start to see a more communitarian interconnectivity. And so that's kind of what you see as an output from the majority of justices, on the Supreme Court. And in terms of, I think with the rise of the internet and the unleashing of information in ways that are not controlled, you are, I think, seeing some form of a kind of regression towards earlier values, power. And so, you see so many conspiracy theories kind of unleashed, and our sources of information are not shared much anymore. And so, that's quite problematic because people enter their echo chamber and they don't get out. And so I think you're seeing that this kind of tribal political expressions, and where we really need to be starting to see our interconnection as beings and our interconnection with the earth. And, what I think is a third way, which is a way where instead of taking positions on issues, we take a position on our approach to issues.
Yes, exactly.
So, I pledge to listen. I pledge to have an open mind. I pledge to work for the greater good. And we could go on and on with a series of values that we could put forward in terms of a way to operate instead of, going down on these positions where all abortions are bad or all abortions are good. Can we start to listen and see, how we can honor the voices of all beings and see a deeper way of communicating? And so I think that's where I hope we're on the precipice of going, is learning that we must learn to hear each other, feel each other, and honor each other, honor the dignity of all beings. And if we can do that, then I think we can really go about solving our problems in a way that's far healthier and much more contextual, meaning that, maybe this solution at this moment isn't what solves it in this community at that moment, but the unfoldment will be a hell of a lot healthier if we go at it from an attitude of appreciation, dignity, respect, the willingness to try to understand, and the willingness to work things through to a solution that recognizes partial truths.
And just to end on this note, what I want to make sure that listeners hear in what you're saying is you're not saying that we just kumbaya our way through this.
No.
What is also part of this process is grappling with the challenges, seeing them clearly, putting them on the table, and choosing to put our humanity before any other belief system.
Yes. Yeah. My hero, he's on my wall as he's about to drink the hemlock, Socrates. Socrates was the wisest, declared by Apollo through the Oracle of Delphi, the wisest in Athens. And why? because he knew he did not know. That's how he realized he was the wisest. It's because everybody thought they knew, and he realized he didn't. And, curiosity is the foundation of philosophy. Stay curious, stay open, stay not knowing, and we can work together to figure out what is right action.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being here. I think we may need to have you on again.
I'd love that.
I think listeners are going to need to hear from somebody who knows the intricacy. Why am I? Intricacies. Thank you. Good Lord.
Okay.
Of the systems that we're in, because we don't know yet if they have to break before they're rebuilt or if we get to rebuild, but I know there's a lot of fear in my community right now. And so I think having somebody on who can really speak to what's happening and have that integral lens and that hope, I think will be really great.
Awesome. I'd love that. But I enjoy being in your presence.
Well, thank you so much. So we'll talk again soon.
All right. Take care.
Thanks to our guest for an amazing conversation today. To find out more about today's guest, you can visit www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast.
You can find Sarah at Head Heart Biz Therapy on Facebook and Instagram.
And you can find Anne at Spare Room Wellness or spareroomwellness.com.
Thanks as always to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, to Liam O'Donnell for the album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. Until next time, bye-bye.